Thank you. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Brown Bag Lit. I'm so happy to see you here. I'm Chloe Elena Miller. I co-founded Brown Bag Lit with Shasta Grant, who's also here. And we founded Brown Bag Lit in January of 2023. So we're coming up on our third year anniversary. And today we're happy to welcome you to our panel discussion, Memoir Mindset, Perfectionism, Performance, and the Beauty of Chaos in Publishing. So we're very happy to welcome our three memoirists. We have Jocelyn Jane Cox, Melissa Fraterrigo, and Anna Rollins. So hopefully you've taken a look at their books. We'll put a bunch of links into the chat so you can find their books and purchase them as well. They're really great memoirs. I think this discussion will be of great interest to all of you, especially the writers in the room today, who I bet you mostly are. We can't wait to hear everything we hear from the memoirists. First, I wanted to share a little bit about Brown Bag Lit. We host free monthly events online like this one. You can find our schedule online on our website. I'll put all the links into the chat, including our YouTube channel, where we share recordings from earlier events and how to follow us on social media. Our Brown Bag Lit readings are free. We hope you'll purchase the author's books and consider leaving us a tip to help pay for our expenses through Buy Me a Coffee, which is where you registered. So on Wednesdays in 2026, right now it's on Wednesdays. We're switching to Tuesdays. We host an ongoing accountability writing group, which we've called Lunch Break Writers. Membership is rolling. You're welcome to join anytime. In addition to our weekly meetings, we host special small group events around literary topics, social hours, office hours, submission parties, and more. Next month, we're going to be hosting editor and publisher Jonah Colson for a small group discussion just for lunch break writers. So we'd love for you to join us if you're interested. For today, please make sure that you stay muted during the conversation. You can put questions into the chat and we'll open it up for a Q&A around about 12:45. So I would like to turn it over to our panelists. Welcome. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for hosting this. I'm really excited. My name is Anna Rollins. I'm the author of Famished on Food, Sex, and Growing Up as a Good Girl. It examines the rhyming scripts of evangelical purity culture and diet culture. And it came out this past Tuesday, December 9th with Erdman's. So it's been exciting. I am an award-winning writing instructor. I taught English in higher education for almost 15 years. And I directed a writing center for about a decade. I'm a literary arts fellow through the West Virginia Creative Network, and I live in Huntington, West Virginia. I've lived in West Virginia my whole life, and I'm here raising my three small children. And Melissa, I reviewed her book for Mayor Literary, and so she's going to tell you a little bit about herself.
Thanks so much, Anna. Hi, my name is Melissa Fraterrigo, and I'm the author of The Perils of Girlhood, which explores the personal and emotional toll of being female and really began as a quest to help my daughters navigate girlhood as they were on the cusp of adolescence. The book came out on September 1st, just this past fall, with the University of Nebraska Press. And if you look at pictures from me in September, and then you look at pictures of me in December, you can see the toll that perfectionism takes. And I'm going to give you a chance to learn a little bit about Jocelyn. Jocelyn and I met as we attempted to kind of try and rein in some of our perfectionistic tendencies as our books were coming out.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks, Brown Bag, for having us. I'm Jocelyn Jane Cox. My book is called Motion Dazzle. I have an extremely large sign behind me. And my book follows the day of my son's first birthday, which is the day that I was hosting a zebra-themed birthday party for him, hence the stripes. And unfortunately, it was also the day that my mother passed away from dementia and other physical ailments. And I had been a competitive figure skater, so that serves as sort of the backdrop to the book. And I really sort of investigate the after effects of sport and things that are not so great about it, but also strengths that you can derive from that participation. I live in Nyack, New York, about 35 minutes north of New York City, with my husband, who is an artist, and my son, who, is featured heavily in the book. He was one in the book, and he is now 12 and 3 inches taller than me. I had been a competitive figure skater, like I said, but I also coached the sport for over 20 years. And I am now happy to be, even though I like that job, I'm very happy to be writing full time and kind of coaching writing and doing a little bit of editing. So this came about because Anna, Melissa, and I were reading each other's arcs at the same time. And we really started to notice, mostly I think we were in touch because we had books coming out around the same time, but we noticed that there was a very strong thread of perfectionism flowing through each of our books. And I wanted to ask Anna about how she has so brilliantly looked at perfectionism through several different lenses and from many different angles in her book, and how that has sort of taught her something, or what she's learned from that process of writing about perfectionism in multiple ways.
Yeah. Yeah, so in Famished, I examine evangelical purity culture and diet culture, and the backdrop for all of that is really my religious environment. I grew up in a conservative religious tradition. It bordered on fundamentalist. And I was really taught that, like, to access, I wasn't explicitly taught this, but it was in all of the underlying everything. I was taught that to access the love of God, I basically had to be perfect. Um, and that's what I sort of unpack throughout the book, is just these scripts where I am told, to follow all these very particular rules. One of the ways that I was taught that I could testify to the love of God was in some ways by, like, keeping up appearances, and if I experienced hardship, to sort of act like it didn't affect me quite as much as someone else, because I had something, I had like God inside of me, and so I was able to, like, perform in this very almost inhuman way. Um, and so my book really unpacks, like, the consequences of teaching, that really uh, it centers control rather than surrender, and it centers appearances rather than our humanity. And so I explore how that affected my faith, but I also explore how it affected my relationship with food and my own sexuality. So in the book, I talk about my struggle with disordered eating. And so I'm getting these perfectionistic scripts in my church environment. And when I talk about my church environment, like, church was kind of my whole world. I was very much in a very insular culture. We used to talk about how we were in the world, but not of the world. I went to a private religious school, and church was my whole life. So that was like, I was getting these messages all the time. Um, so I'm getting these perfectionistic messages there, but then I'm getting it from the larger culture too, about what my body should look like as a woman. Um, I'm coming of age in the 90s into the 2000s. And so it was this time period where people were really obsessed with women's bodies. Uh, Glamour magazine had an article that talked about how the most fat phobic period in history was the 1990s. And this was the same time that the war on obesity was going on. But also, like, heroin chic is being glamorized too. And so there are just these extremes of, like, the way that we're talking about bodies. So I talk about how that perfectionism affected my relationship with food. And then I talk about how evangelical purity culture, which was rooted in abstinence and my experience of it was like these very strict rules about what you could and could not explore with your sexuality, how that impacted my ability to be embodied in my future relationships. So perfectionism is all over my memoir. It's pretty much the whole, it's trying to recover from perfectionism and trying to believe that when I fail, I am still worthy of love, and and that my humanity is not like a liability to my soul.
Mm. For anyone who hasn't read Anna's book yet, it is such a personal exploration of all of this, but it's also a really intellectual endeavor. And I just have a lot of respect for how you have blended the personal with the intellectual in your pages. And I just wanted to ask, so how has the perfectionism worked for you or not worked for you as far as creating the book or promoting the book?
Yeah. I mean, perfectionism kept me from writing for years. I studied creative writing in undergrad, and anytime I would go to write for class, like if I was honest on the page, I would usually end up talking about like food and bodies and God. And I just thought that that was embarrassing. I think I had a lot of internalized misogyny. I was like, this is like a lesser topic. People don't want to hear this. And so I would always scrap what I was really interested in and then turn something else in for class. And it usually wasn't very good, but it was because I had this idea that if I wrote about these things that I really wanted to write about, people would view me as silly or unserious, or, you know, it was a lot of internalized misogyny. Um, and so and I also always felt like I wasn't able to do it justice. Like I knew what good writing looked like, and I knew I wasn't there yet. And because there was that gap still, and that gap existed because of youth and experience, and I needed to practice. But because there was that gap, I uh, was too afraid to put myself out there. So um, I for about a decade, whenever I would go to write, I would realize that it wasn't as good as it could be. So then I would put it aside. And then fortunately, I didn't put writing aside totally. I read compulsively, I read all the time. And I know that that made me a better writer. And I taught writing for what ended up being, 15 years. And so that helped me hone my skills. But eventually, I was able to allow myself to write even imperfectly during the pandemic. And part of it was because I thought we might all die. And I just thought to myself, like, you're not going to say the things you care about because you're afraid of what people will think of you. Well, we all might be dead. So that sounds really crass, but like there was something that like just turned in my brain during that time period. I felt more capable of, possibly failing in front of people and it being okay. But perfectionism, just because I wanted people to take me seriously and I wanted what I had to say to be as good as it could be, and that stopped me from writing for years and years. Yeah. So, and I know Melissa has talked about how perfectionism plays a role in how it has played a role in her writing process and in marketing. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, Melissa?
Yeah, I would. Thank you so much, Anna. And I also appreciate you talking about how your craft of writing this thing that you really loved and wanted to do, how it was affected by kind of this larger element of thinking writing has to be just one way, that you have to be perfect in order to do it. And certainly um as a memoirist, I've had to come face to face with kind of the chaos of publishing. When you are writing for yourself, whether it be in your journal or you're just working on a particular essay, there's this idea that well, I'm just writing for myself, and I do think that that's something that I teach my students as well at that first pass, to write as if there's nobody else in the room, it's just you at your desk with your words. And then later, when we start to think about sharing our work, that's when we can kind of invite other people into our process. But when we're talking about publishing memoirs, like the three of us have, you simply have to consider how best can I, manage this manage this process. So much of it is outside of your control, and you have to kind of find ways to embrace what is within your realm and what you've got to let go of. For instance, I mentioned my book came out on September 1st, and I had an event at a bookstore just a month ago, and I touched base with the bookstore manager twice. The reading was held on a Saturday, and I touched base with her twice to make sure that everything was in order. I knew what time I was supposed to arrive, and everything was set up as it should be. And it wasn't until and she said that everything was set. And it wasn't until I actually walked in the bookstore that day that I discovered that my books had not arrived. She said, "Well, I was certain they were going to come today." So obviously, um, you know, she knew when we had that last email conversation 3 days prior, the books weren't still, had yet to arrive, and she was just optimistic that they were going to be there. But obviously, for somebody who takes, a great pride in her work, and you spend many months arranging these events, it was a little bit of a letdown. So we just pivoted. I signed book plates that day, and something that I now do is I actually drive with extra copies of my book and bookmarks in my car. It's just a little thing, but it allows me to feel a little bit more comfortable with what I can control. The other thing is the fact that we are publishing memoir, we're publishing stories about our real lives, sometimes gives readers a sense that they have like an additional into your personality and your family. And the other thing that I've had to reframe is this idea that I still get to define what I am comfortable with divulging and what is not comfortable to me. Um, for instance, I recently spoke at a book club where a woman who later explained that she was a therapist wanted to know if I had been undergoing therapy during the process of drafting my book. And I was a little taken aback by that question. And certainly, um, I think I did the best that I could kind of answering it in that moment. But I was definitely uncomfortable. I was taken aback. And yet the beauty that we talk about in our conversation today occurred later when somebody else at that same book group event came up to me and said, I just really appreciate how brave you've been in this book and in telling your story. And then when we continued to converse, I kind of asked her if she was interested in writing, and she said, I would like to write, but I don't now. And so we kind of talked a little bit about that process. So I think sometimes an event that may not go the way that you think it should or might best can actually provoke additional intimacy and additional opportunities to connect with readers and with other individuals.
I love that. And so you've kind of spoken to this a little bit, but how do you as a recovering perfectionist handle the chaos involved in publishing the personal for a broad audience? It sounds like you get to define what you feel comfortable divulging. Are there other things?
Yeah, I've had to kind of, kind of ironic because I just shared the story of this reader asking if I had, undergone therapy. And certainly I have had to develop my own kind of toolkit for how to approach the publication process. And I've had to kind of unpack some beliefs. And one of them simply is that there's only one way to be successful. I think you could talk to 20 different writers and ask them, how do you how do you sell books? And you would get 20 different answers. Nobody knows, especially in this post-pandemic world. It's constantly changing and it changes with each book and with each project. And of course, with each decade, or well, these days, maybe with each day. Um, but so the other thing that I've had to do is kind of expand my notion of what success is. So I kind of remember that no one no one review, no one publication, no one event is going to um, determine whether or not my book and my story is worthwhile. And it kind of goes back to something that you said, Anna, that we get a chance to determine that for ourselves. So one thing that I've tried to do to kind of protect that vulnerability, that's a part of the memoir process is really leaning into my strengths. So something that I started early on was I created just like a folder where I would keep track of just positive notes that I would receive from friends or readers or even quotes that I liked that other writers had written. Um, Emails that I might have received, anything along the way that I could use to actually physically have a touch point. And then the other thing that I did, and I think Jocelyn might touch on this as well, is I created a mantra early on, and I would just remind myself of my mantra, which was "Let's go, let girl." Or let's go, go girl, which was this idea playing off the word girlhood, which is in my book title, and also the things that I could kind of get myself excited for, and then the other things that were outside of my control that I could let go of. So, yeah. And Jocelyn, you obviously also, as I mentioned, had a mantra, and I know that those mantras have also been a part of performance, and that's played a huge role in Motion Dazzle. You're still on book tour now. Do you want to talk a little bit about how, that performance is continued?
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning the mantras. My mantra, and Melissa and I, early in our book launch days, we shared our mantras with each other, and mine was forward motion. Of course, motion is in my title. And the whole concept was like just whatever disappointments, and I knew there would be some, and there have been some, whatever came up, whatever unexpected things came up, like just keep moving forward. So forward motion was my phrase. And that has been helpful. I wish that I had done the doc. I kept saying I was going to do the doc of like the positive comments, and I just never pulled it together. But all of the wonderful texts and emails and private messages that have come in have been so incredibly helpful during this vulnerable time. So that is so cool. Um, yeah, performance is something that I gave a lot of thought to while composing my book. Of course, figure skating is performance based. It's a sport, but it's also a performance. So I do look at that. And I've really been trying to relook or like take back the word performance because we have this word performative now and it has such a negative ring. And sure, if we are being performative, we are being fake, we are being superficial. There's something kind of sketchy and maybe unhealthy about it. But I think that we are all engaging with a level of performance every day. When we are going to work, something's going on in our lives and we're going to work. Something's going on in our lives and we have young children and we can't really, it's not time for us to tell them what's going on yet. We're at a party and we have some financial concerns or a diagnosis or something. So I think that we are all performing all the time, whether we call it that or not. And I see it very much as a strength and a coping mechanism. So when I was out on the ice, I was a rather fearful person, and I wasn't extremely brave when I was skating, and I had to do some very difficult things as a pair skater, with my brother lifting me up. And I was a performer, and I really loved hamming it up, and I I did derive joy from the tada and from the sequins on my costumes and from the music and the choreography. So that performance actually did pull me forward. I would argue I was doing the same thing on the day of the party. My mother was in the hospital 3 hours away. I didn't know that she was going to pass away that day, but she was not doing well. And here I was hosting this very cute DIY party and, opening the door. Hey! And meanwhile, the person I love as much as my son is really struggling and has been for a very long time. So I'm very interested in how we all are doing that all the time and how it is a strength. I would also posit that writing is a performance to an extent. Of course, fiction writing is very obviously a performance. We're trying on different costumes and different characters and different settings. But even memoir writing, we're making these decisions of what we are going to put into the story and what we are not. And that's not to be coy, but to actually stay to our theme. We're all trying to figure out what is the primary story, what is the main story that I am trying to tell in this particular book. And so to use Melissa's word, like creating what are the boundaries here of this story? And I think that ends up being a curation and that ends up being a performance in and of itself. Because even though I'm being honest in my book and I'm very much trying to tell a truth, there are probably 100 or 600 other things I could have said in this book or different, tributaries I could have followed in the book. And I chose to tell this particular story. And I see that as a performance. I see we take on, Anna was talking about the sort of the hesitancy to write about her story. And I think that being an author is also I'm saying, you say to yourself, I am an author. I am going to do this. And what is an author but just someone who sits down and actually writes a lot? It can be every day, it can be once every 3 weeks, but you are a writer if you write. And I think that that's its own kind of character, that's its own performance. And I say that in a really positive way. You say, yes, I am a writer. I am a writer. I'm going to write these things down. It can be in a notebook. It can be on a computer. It can be in your notes app. You are a writer if you are putting your words somewhere in a way to create meaning. Um, and that leads me to, yes, the book launch and the promotion of a book has really had a lot of connection to my skating career because it is so public and I am comfortable in front of an audience, but I have definitely experienced a lot of anxiety, of course, a lot of imposter syndrome, and a lot of doubt in the process. And I had to rely on that concept of forward motion and really put myself out there. I do have the help of an amazing publicist, but so much of what I've done has been coming from my energy and my ideas and saying, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to make this book from a small press go as far as it can go. And that has taken a lot of digging deep and a lot of courage. And yeah, a lot of performance. You get to an event and you thought there might be 15 people there, and there are seven. And you're really excited that those seven people are there, but you did picture something a little bigger. And you're not being fake when you're really pleased to have that number of people in the audience, but there is a little performance there. You're like, hey, so there's these times where you have to, say, all right, I am good enough. This situation is good enough. This book is good enough. This event is good enough. And really just enjoy that and lean into all of that. So I will say that I've really enjoyed the book launch and it's for me, another way of experiencing motion dazzle and experiencing, I don't know, the fun and positive side of existence and of writing. Um, okay, we decided that we wanted to, in the spirit of positivity and in the spirit of inspiration, we wanted to go through and share our top tips for, bringing a book into the world and how we can navigate forward, and what we would impart at this point, since Melissa's book has been out since September 1st. Mine has been out since September 30th. Anna's just came out Tuesday. And so we wanted to share some top tips, and I will punt back to Anna for that.
Yeah, so my top tip is that no one cares about you. And that sounds awful, but it's helped me because I can get so in my head thinking, what does so and so think about me? What if someone didn't like this, or someone made this tiny little comment, or I can get really in my head about what everyone is thinking about me. But the thing that grounds me is I think, oh, probably no one is really thinking about me that much. I am thinking about me a lot. I am the center character in my little universe, but everyone else, they are the center character in their own universe. So that has been very helpful for me to just think about, like, no one is thinking that much about you. When you make a mistake, like, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So if there's something I do that I regret, even if I somehow end up regretting publishing this whole book, hopefully I don't. But even if I do, like, in a little while, people are going to forget that this ever even happened. No one is thinking about me as much as I think about me. And that is a gift. And that doesn't keep me from promoting. In fact, like, it helps me put myself out there more, because if I make a mistake or say something stupid, or I don't know, all the many things you worry about, like, I can just remember that most people are not centering me in their narrative. And that gives me a lot of freedom. So that's my top tip. Melissa, what's your top tip?
Thank you, Anna. Lots of great things to remember and keep in mind there. Certainly my top tip is, and this is just three short words, you do you. I think that this kind of dovetails off what Anna is saying, and that is that we are each our own individuals, just as our books and our creative work is unique. The way that we introduce that to the world is also going to be unique to us. So what you are going to require to do so in a fashion that makes you feel your very best is going to be different than anybody else. Something that has been really helpful to me is to have a support system. Jocelyn, Anna, and some other female writers and I meet once a month. Actually, some women who are on this call meet once a month. We are all individuals who have books coming out or were recently published, and we meet once a month to kind of support each other, to offer best practices, to check in and share both our triumphs and pain points. And that's been really fabulous because it allows the siloed process of publishing to feel a little bit less lonely. So those support systems and really leaning into your own unique needs would be my best tip, my top tip. Jocelyn, how about you?
Yeah, I think my top tip is to try to figure out, and it really relates to what you were saying, Melissa, is try to figure out how you can have fun in the process, given that there are anxieties, given that there are things happening that you don't expect. And there are disappointments. I think that one of the things that we've talked about is that, you kind of think you get the book deal, and then, the book comes out and you're like, yeah. And I personally will admit that I thought, oh, well, that's the end of that rejection loop. And no, you're still trying to get more readers and more sales, and you're trying to get those coveted Amazon reviews, and you're trying to get those companion pieces and those excerpts and those interviews and those reviews. And you try so hard, and some of it doesn't come through. So I think for me, I've really had to focus on the fun that can be had through this. Of course, that's what I was doing the day that I was, hosting that birthday party, and I'm kind of emulating that. And I directly emulated that with my book launch party. My local launch party was a recreation of that first birthday party. And I had the same food and some of the same decorations. I rented a hall and I had 100 people there. It was more people than my wedding. It was a whole thing. And I can tell you right now, that was one of the least anxiety provoking experiences in this because I was really focusing on the fun. I was like, here's the little zebra that was the centerpiece of the party. And I was so focused on what was fun about it and looking at the old pictures to see, oh, and we had pirate's booty and I had grapes, and I was focusing so much on the fun that it really made it possible for me to swing that big for that party. And I think a lot of us talk about social media and we all have different opinions about, Anna was talking about like how, get over yourself, like not everyone's focusing on you. And it's so strange with social media. One of my goals was to post every day and on Instagram and like connect that to Facebook and, connect that to Threads. And which, by the way, is like a nice little, I mean, meta. It's so annoying, but at least we get to like bundle those posts. And I've just had to lead with fun with that too. I haven't stuck completely with my one post a day, but I really tried to lead with fun. Like what would be fun to post? I didn't create at first I was like, oh, I'm gonna make a spreadsheet and like schedule out every single post. And I'm like, no, the scheduling out of the post takes away some of the fun for me personally, this is to Melissa's point, like you do you. I was like, no, I can't have such a rigid schedule, but I'm going to try to post every day and just see what feels fun that day. Now, certain posts just happen. We were promoting this event, so that was like, oh, that's what I posted that day. But not that everyone wants to be silly, and not that everyone's content is silly or necessarily fun, quote unquote, but just be really aware of what you enjoy. And if there's something that you do not enjoy, how about you skip it? If you absolutely hate social media, it's possible to put a book out without it. And if you absolutely hate doing in-person events, or it's not possible for you, Anna has 3 young children and has not like completely prioritized in-person events, but she is all over the place doing interviews with Substack writers and podcasters, etc., and like really killing it. And so I just think like, if something's not fun, you can give yourself permission to not do it as well. So I'll leave it there, and I think we're gonna open that up to Q&A, right, Chloe and Shasta?
Yes, and I've been cutting and pasting the questions. We have some great questions. Um, I think I'm going to start with Rebecca's question, and then I see that Karen has her hand up. Rebecca asks, I don't think we talk enough about the publicity aspect of getting books out in the world. Did you hire publicists, and how was that experience?
I want to start with that just because, thank you for that, Rebecca. We actually were talking about that before we started our Zoom call, the fact that nobody really discusses the business of being a writer, and how there still is a little bit of pay to play, very much so. And I would love to get to a point where we're a little bit more transparent with that. I have a publicist, or actually 2 publicists. In that I had hired an initial publicist because the publicist that had worked with me for my 2 prior books wasn't really able to take me on due to her health and some other things going on in her life. But then I ended up kind of folding her back in. So I do have 2 publicists, but to Jocelyn's point, I've also done a lot on my own, and I'll let Jocelyn and Anna jump in here as well.
Yeah, I also have a publicist, and she's incredible, the most amazing publicist. But I would say that as far as like my media hits go, she has gotten so far maybe a third of them, and I've gotten the other 2/3. So I am pitching like crazy. She's getting a lot of like the more national outlets, but I'm doing a lot of the podcast pitching, and I did a Substack tour where I was on like a dozen Substacks within like the audience that I was trying to hit. And so most of that was me. So we're really combining efforts, and it's what I've been doing on my own. I would call it a full-time job. That is, yeah, I would call it a full-time job. So it really is, I mean, people aren't fully transparent about that either. Like how much work you're doing um without I don't expect to earn this back financially. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Anna and I, as Anna said, we have the same publicist, and someone asked in the chat who that was, and it's Cassie Mansmurray from Pine State Publicity. And I would say it's about the same thing. I think she's gotten me about a third of the things that you see me doing, or events and different publications. But yes, they were some of the bigger hits, the things that she has gotten me some things that I might not have been able to get myself, and it has been extremely valuable. I knew when I got a small press deal that I would um, try to hire a publicist if I possibly could. And the reality that we're hearing from people who are with big five publishers and presses as well is that writers are not getting quite as much support as you would think, or maybe they used to get more support, like they'd get flown around for their book tour and it would get completely arranged. And you would have an in-house publicist that was able to focus a lot of time on you. And I'm hearing that that's really less and less. And so even people who are more traditionally published by bigger houses are also having to hire their own people and or do a lot of the work of making those connections and networking to get those appearances, etc.
There's a question in the chat about the general range or cost. Chital asks that what's the budget, that it might differ from person to person, but how much might someone set aside? Do you have a sense of the range? You don't have to disclose numbers for yourself.
Well, I can share that I think every publicist actually does it differently. So some publicists, my understanding is that my arrangement is a monthly. I pay a monthly fee, and I think her standard engagement is 7 months. Uh, this is, in general, like 6 months leading up to the book, and then 1 month after the book. I elected, because my book has, figure skating, I elected to engage with her for another 2 months. I'm going to start up with her again in January and February to kind of do more of an Olympic push. But my understanding is that I feel awkward disclosing the actual fees, but I think some publicists also just do it more on an hourly basis. Like we can do 10 hours, or we can do, however many hours a month, etc.
I've heard of people hiring like someone who will give them a marketing plan. So, I mean, and I know that marketing and publicity are different, but yeah, like there are varying levels of support that you can hire. You can hire someone who will kind of like coach you so that you can go do. It is nice to have a connected publicist, because I know that Cassie, the one that the publicist Jocelyn and I are working with, she has so many connections that I would never even know about. So, yeah.
I've also heard of publicists offering smaller batches, like focusing on one aspect, maybe podcasts or interviews, and then doing that for a particular fee, maybe $500. Shasta, I think you've had some insight into this.
Yes, I have a book coming out next year, and I reached out to a number of publicists to get proposals, and there was a pretty big range for like a 6 to 7 month campaign, which is kind of typical, like Jocelyn said. It was anywhere from 7,000 to 20,000. That was kind of the range of quotes that I received.
I just want to jump in and say one other thing, and that is that when we talk about, I think, publicists, we think automatically like um, how we're going to get additional publicity for our book, hits in trade magazines or on social media. But the publicists that I've known for a longer period of time, I see that relationship as something that's a little bit more collaborative and supportive. So yes, she's able to offer me some thoughts on, hey, let's pitch this place, but she can also kind of talk me off the ledge. So that again was something that I knew that I needed. I needed that like emotional support from somebody who was knowledgeable about the business.
Thank you. It's a really big range. Karen, you've had your hand up, and then we'll go to one of the chat questions and to Rebecca.
Yes, thanks. And I apologize in advance for my cold. This is a great discussion. I can definitely relate to the perfectionism. And I do have a question for Anna, but I just want to comment in terms of all the ups and downs of, getting out there with your book, marketing your book. I'll just share something from the wise older author among you all. My book came out in 2023, and I that may be the end of my publishing career for the most part. I have decided that, but just looking back, I see it as a great big adventure, and so that encompasses the good and the bad. And I imagine myself, if I make it to 80, looking back and like telling my grandchildren, "Oh, remember when Nana, or they wouldn't remember, but Nana wrote a book, and remember to my husband, remember when we did this?" So just one great adventure, something that you wouldn't experience otherwise. So my question for Anna is, you had talked about your faith, how it kind of impacted how you looked at things, and you said something like, well, you weren't exactly taught that, but it's still kind of how you saw it, and I go into that a little bit too in my writing, and it's how I look at it is, and I had a very different upbringing. I was raised Catholic and it was very kind of normal upbringing, but not perfect. Nobody is, but I look at it as how I internalize things. So there were certain messages that were taught, and nobody said to me specifically, "Oh, let people walk all over you." But that was what I internalized, and I just wondered if that resonated with you in terms of your upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because no one explicitly told you that. Maybe you saw that modeled, and maybe even I think about like what is emphasized versus what is de-emphasized. When you hear all these messages of like control people, if you make a mistake, you might get kicked out of X, Y, and Z. Like if you hear all these messages of rigidity and a lack of forgiveness, then that's what gets internalized, even if that's not explicitly said. And I think that children are extra sensitive to that. Like I think children really pick up on like the quiet parts that are not said out loud because they you're trying to figure out the world. And so you're not just listening to what's said on the surface. Yeah, but I very much agree with you. What I explore in my book are not things that were necessarily like explicitly taught. It was more like these things that were modeled over and over, and here's how it affected me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Amre, who writes, how did you find each other and the group for recently published forthcoming authors? I would, if the authors can share, and then if anyone in the chat, we have a lot of writers here, want to share other places where you found like-minded folks, that would be great.
So I think we were talking about this before. I think we all met through a binders group on Facebook. And then I also run a small online writing studio, the Lafayette Writer Studio, and Jocelyn taught a class for me. And then we kept in touch after that as well. So it was through social media.
Yeah, I will say, social media has all of its issues, but I would say that the writing community that I have now is all traced back to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And so I have to say it out loud that it's been really, really helpful to me as far as creating connection, but also learning so much from so many different posts on craft issues, but also just to watch what other writers are doing and how they're navigating through their writing careers. It has been so illuminating. So I can't, I have left Twitter, but I had a good run there. And I think I originally met Anna on Twitter. Sad tear, but I know some people are still on there, but I am not. So, yeah, so it has its place.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Hi. I asked the publicity question, a publicist question, so I wanted to clarify. I think it's amazing that we can do that. I think it's tied to the subject of this session, which is perfectionism. I'm just going to talk about myself as a person who grew up, this immigrant, like I can do everything myself and I shouldn't ask for anyone's help. And it shows weakness if I ask for help that I say that I had a development editor. What does that mean? Could you not do it on your own? And I feel like it's the same for publicists. So my book's coming out, and then I'm like, and I am with a big five, but listen, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Everything's been cut for everything. And I just want to say, like, it's this part of ourselves that thinks like if we admit that we asked for help, like somehow we're not. But the amount of work it takes is 50 people working at the same time, day and night. It's incredible amount of work. So just I've hired a publicist for my kind of YA novel and for very just as a beginning, not those big numbers, but who knows? You know what I mean? If I had a novel, adult novel, maybe I'd make it work. Mine is just $1,000 just right now, but I think it's good to share, is what I'm saying, that I don't feel like a total, like, oh, should I hide this that I hired a publicist? No, it's like all of us are doing 1,000 hours of work just to get our books out into the world. Do you know what I mean? And I see the work you guys have done, all three of you, and it's incredible. It's incredible. When I see your stuff on social media, all I think is, oh my God, the amount of work she's doing. That's amazing. And I applaud you every single day. Post 1,000 times about your book. Every single time I see it, I think, yes, yes, because it makes the rest of us think we can do that too. And we're not embarrassed. And we're not like, especially as women, I really feel like it's this whole thing about promoting ourselves. And I love when I see women promoting the hell out of themselves. Good for you. I congratulate you.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully we can all share all of the information that we need. We have 6 minutes left. We have three questions left in the chat. I'm going to read them, and then if each of you want to touch on all or some of the aspects. So Shauna asked about when you were getting into the writing process, did you know what you wanted to accomplish? And this goes back to the mantras you were sharing, or if that was like the mantras came while you were writing, or if that was something you came to as you were writing. Sue asked, when during your writing publication process did you identify the audience you were trying to reach? So mantras when they came, your audience, and then the last question is from Doris. How do you know when your writing is good enough? Which is a big, hard question. Thank you.
I will hit on the how do you know when it's good enough? You don't. But I think the more you read, for me, I felt like I hit a point where I was reading all the time and I felt like what I was reading was like similar to some of the stuff I was writing. And then that's when I started sharing with people I trust. I shared with people whose writing I really respected. So like people who are out of my league. And when they kind of they gave me feedback and I could tell like they weren't fake nice. That's when I felt like, okay, I can put this out into the world. So that's sort of how I determined like, okay, I think that this is ready to maybe go somewhere. But yeah, that's the question that resonated with me most.
I can address the audience question. When I first started writing my book, I also started my book during the pandemic. It was a very insular experience, and I felt like I was very much doing it for myself. And I actually started writing the book mostly as a letter to my son. So it was a very, very personal experience. And it was through the revision process that I started to open up to thinking about the reader and thinking about who might benefit from my story. And I took myself through a couple different exercises where I was thinking about keywords. It sounds kind of corporate, but I was thinking about keywords and categories and takeaways, and imagining these sort of groups of people that might be inspired or interested in what I was doing. For me, that was caregivers or ex-athletes or people who have dealt with someone with dementia in their lives, and also new mothers. So I kind of it was through the revision process that I think I really discovered and started to picture my audience. But for me personally, in that early first draft, it was a very individual and insular experience.
In terms of the mantra and considering kind of how best to promote my book, that was something that came out much later, and it was through those conversations with Jocelyn and with other writers. But just to kind of touch base with or touch on something that Jocelyn just talked about, revision. I think that the more time that you spend with your book, even while you're just very early on in that relationship that you have with your creative project, the better you're going to get to know each other, and the more you're going to know about what that book needs from you as well. And maybe this also goes back to Rebecca's idea of self-promotion, and how sometimes we are our own worst enemies, and we tend to judge ourselves and think, well, this is what somebody else is saying, rather than listening to what we need and what we truly believe.
Thank you to the three of you. Thank you to the audience. I hope that everyone will buy all three books. And if you're looking for more community, Brown Bag Lit hosts the Lunch Break Writers. We're moving to Tuesdays in 2026, and we're doing our first event of the new year is a pop-up free event on Monday, January 5th. And our goal is to write together and build community and ask questions and grow together. I put the link for the free registration into the chat.